Now to the bone-dry conditions up and down the West Coast tonight, and the fears that an already bad drought could get even worse once the summer heat truly takes hold. The drought's impact clear in places like Folsom Lake, California, critical to the state's water supply. Officials tonight sounding the alarm about the effects of climate change and the new normal that might come with it. Our Zareen Shah reports from the critically low reservoir.
Folsom Lake is one of California's largest reservoirs, crucial to providing water to the state's 40-plus million residents. But it's dramatically shrunken this year, docking dozens of boats on dry land.
We recognize that we're in a race against time to protect our communities and our natural places from the impacts of climate change.
People can normally launch boats off of this ramp, especially during this time of year, but as you can see from our drone, those levels are so low, it takes at least a quarter of a mile to get to that water. Relentless heat and dry conditions evaporating the already below average snowpack in the nearby Sierra Nevada mountains that supplies the reservoir. If this was a normal time and this lake was full, how far underwater would we be right now?
So right now we'd be about 70 feet underwater. The normal.
Richard Preston LeMay has been overseeing Folsom Lake for over 15 years. What exactly is this water right here used for?
So the water that we're on right now is used for a variety of things, from drinking water for some of the local municipalities. It's also used downstream on the American River for the fisheries habitat, and then for other water consumers downstream for farming, agricultural purposes.
The superintendent of Folsom Lake Park says the already parched drought conditions are a major concern ahead of what's likely to be a bone-dry summer. Unless something changes, this is going to be one of the most dire summers that you've ever seen here.
It is, yes, for sure.
100% of the state of California suffering a worsening drought, posing a threat to farmers. The state's hydroelectric power plants, which could mean rolling blackouts throughout the state, and wildfire danger that could displace numerous communities. Climate change worsens the extremes that lead to drought, including by making average temperatures hotter and heat waves last longer.
Climate change impacts have become a matter of protecting communities in California. Worsening wildfire risk, worsening drought, extreme heat. We used to think about preparing for climate change impacts as sort of a future planning exercise for coming decades. Now we're actually responding to it as a public safety imperative.
California's Natural Resource Secretary seeing the effects of climate change year after year, publicly confronting former President Donald Trump in the midst of the state's historic 2020 fire season.
If we ignore that science and sort of put our head in the sand and think it's all about vegetation management, we're not going to succeed together protecting Californians.
Okay, it'll start getting cooler. You just watch.
I wish science agreed with you.
Well, I don't think science knows, actually.
Now he's focused on solutions.
We do have to take action. We cannot stick our head in the sand. We have to be driven by science and facts and actually make the investments and make the decisions that we need to, both to reduce carbon pollution and combat climate change and protect our communities in the meantime.
Wade Crowfoot says the state is currently in its second drought season and drastic measures could be ahead if it continues. Of 2015, I remember guidance from the state for us to take certain actions at home.
Yeah.
To limit water, to not flush this off, and to take shorter showers. Are we headed in that direction right now?
We don't know how long this drought will last. And if this drought, for example, lasts into a third dry winter, those types of restrictions would certainly be possible, if not expected.
Just this week, one of the state's largest counties, Santa Clara, announced it will restrict water use, even opening the door to fine people if they waste water. And California's wine industry suffering from the continued water shortages, forcing wineries to adapt.
We're planning on coping with the climate change and the reduction of rain. We don't see that it will necessarily be improving, and we want to be prepared.
At Acquiesce Winery, the all-female farms owner Susan Tipton says her harvest took a 25% hit last season.
It's a worry. I wonder if my granddaughter will be able to walk through this vineyard one day and make wine from it.
So concerned, she says she recently donated part of her 18 acres to UC Davis to study which grapes farmers should be planting to best thrive in these changing conditions.
water is a finite thing.
And to preserve the art of making wine, she and many local farmers placing a tax on themselves, partly for monthly meetings with climate scientists.
What is it like emotionally? This is something you've poured your heart into. You started this winery.
I think that, it's disturbing for sure, worrisome for sure, but I think you have to put a spin on it to think long term and what you can do.
Holding on to hope as the world continues getting warmer.
Despite everything that happened, you're hopeful.
Oh, certainly. Yes, you have to be.
Zoreen Shah, ABC News, Folsom Lake.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking.
A dangerous heat wave from the northern plains to New England is breaking records while the south faces a severe weather threat. Meanwhile, red flag fire warnings have been posted in several western states where a historic drought is threatening a catastrophic fire season. Mola Lengi reports from Boston.
Boston is under a heat emergency. Temperatures rose above 90 degrees for the third consecutive day.
In the last couple of days, we've had 18 calls that we've flagged as being, directly heat related. But on top of that, we've seen a 31% increase in our call volume for the last 48 hours.
Many flocked to cooling centers and neighboring parks.
Why'd you guys come out here today?
Hot.
It's hot, yeah.
More than 24 million people from the northern plains to New England and parts of Texas are under a heat advisory. Today, at least 6 states set record highs. It was a similar story in Wisconsin, where libraries are offering an escape.
We changed our policy to allow drink in the library so people can bring their water bottle in or fill their water bottle.
Severe drought conditions across the West have helped fuel 2 wildfires in Arizona, forcing hundreds to evacuate homes outside of Phoenix. More than 100,000 acres have burned. In neighboring Utah, the dry conditions prompted the governor to call for a weekend of prayer.
We need more rain, and we need it now. We need some divine intervention.
The heat and humidity also produced scattered severe thunderstorms from Alabama to Texas, where a woman's body was recovered after floodwaters swept her car off the road. More than 100 homes were flooded outside of Houston.
Well, back here in Boston, the extreme heat is expected to continue tomorrow with temperatures above 90s for the 4th day straight. Meanwhile, in Minneapolis, about a dozen schools there have announced they're moving to remote learning as the extreme heat is expected to continue there for the rest of the week. Elaine?
Mola Lengi, thank you. For more, let's bring in CBS News meteorologist and climate specialist Jeff Baradelli. Hi there, Jeff. So let's talk about the heat wave. How bad is it and how much longer will it last?
So for this early in the season, this has been a very intense heat wave. Even more so, though, it's a very large heat wave because it covers a large part of the nation, about 2/3 of the country. Now, it's a little complicated because it's trapped a storm system right over here. And so it's a little cooler down in the southeast. In fact, over the weekend, it was around 20 to 25 degrees cooler in New Orleans than it was in Minneapolis, which got to about 100 degrees or so. And the heat is really hugging the Canadian border, as you see. Now, in Mola's piece, he was just talking about the flooding in the south. And the reason is this storm is trapped under the heat dome, so it really can't go anywhere. And so it's been raining for days in the south. We have some rain in Texas today. But this is going to be alleviated a little bit as it begins to move on. Problem is in the south is that it's rain on top of 2 months of 2 to 3 feet of rain, and so it's causing flash flooding. All right, so the heat is going to continue on Tuesday. Some record highs we're expecting. Minneapolis could hit 96 degrees, and in the east, you've got another pocket of heat. Boston right around 97 degrees. Now, it's going to cool down a little bit as we head into Wednesday, but the humidity is going to come up. You can see there's rain across the Ohio Valley, and so injecting this humidity in, even if temperatures only get to 89, let's say, not over the 90-degree mark in places like Philly and Washington, D.C., it's still going to feel oppressive with, feels like temperatures around 96 degrees on Wednesday.
Well, Jeff, what about the West? The drought is increasing wildfire risk there. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so, you remember last year, of course, that was the worst wildfire season in the history of the West, and this is what the drought looked like last year. So there was drought in certain areas of California, Oregon, into New Mexico, and Arizona, and Colorado, but look at the difference between last year and this year. Extraordinary drought across the West, the worst we have ever seen. And so we are setting ourselves up for, unfortunately, probably a catastrophic fire season. You can see how dry it is across the West. We have not seen a lot of rain. La Nina, which we had last year, means that we see less rain across the West. That's one of the reasons. The other reason is climate change. Here's something else I want to show you. Now, this is a little convoluted, but I'm going to break it down for you. So this basically shows us the energy available for fire. So if there's a fire, how much energy, fuel is available because of how dry it is. Well, the red line is the historic record, January, June, and December right here. Notice how the blue line is where we are right now. Way above the record for the date, but not just way above the record for the date, way above the record for all time across California. And we're just at the beginning of fire season, Elaine.
That is so stark, and so too is that difference in the drought graphics that you just showed year over year. Is climate change a factor here, Jeff?
Yeah, there are a couple of factors. First of all, we've been in a drought now since about the year 2000. In fact, if you look back in history, look at tree rings, scientists have discovered that this is the second worst drought in the last 1,200 years. They're calling it a mega drought. It could be kind of tipping into the worst drought in 1,200 years. We'll see what happens over the next couple of years or so, but climate change is playing a part, and here's how climate change plays a part. Summer warming. You can see most of the country, with the exception of the upper Midwest where there's a lot of irrigation, but over here, around the country, and especially in the West, it is warm. Places like Phoenix, where there was a fire in Arizona during the day today, they have warm around 4 degrees Fahrenheit just in the last 50 years or so. So when you warm the brush, you warm the ground, you evaporate a lot, you're adding more energy, so you're evaporating a lot of the moisture into the atmosphere, and the ground gets drier and drier. Then on top of that, if you have a La Nina, like we had last year, you have about 2 years or so with very limited rain. Just north of Lake Oroville, which is an important reservoir in California, they've seen 3 to some pockets 4 feet less rain than they're supposed to see just since last October. So in 9 months, their rainfall deficit in some pockets there, 3 feet or more. Just to give you an idea of how bad things are in California right now.
Just a confluence of things happening there. Jeff Beardelli for us. Jeff, thank you so much.
All this week, we have focused on the rising fire risk in the West, the extreme drought, and the threat to farming and wildlife. This morning, 5 wildfires are burning in Utah, and the governor has declared a drought emergency there. The Great Salt Lake is expected to reach its lowest point in modern history this year. Jonathan Bigliotti shows how the lack of water affects lives and livelihoods in Utah, where many farmers are struggling just to keep their crops alive.
I don't know how long we can survive because I don't know how bad it's going to get.
On his property north of Salt Lake City, 6th-generation farmer Ron Gibson is covering his crops with plastic to conserve water. His water allocation was cut by 70%.
If we don't get these crops to market, we can't survive.
He also says the cost of feeding his dairy cows has doubled in a year.
When agriculture's gone, then our ability to produce food is gone. That's what scares me the most about this whole situation.
The entire state of Utah is experiencing drought, more than 90% in an extreme category.
We would be standing underwater had it been a normal water year.
We met Zach Frankel, executive director of the Utah Rivers Council at the Great Salt Lake.
90% of our precipitation comes in the winter and snow. As our winter air temperatures continue to rise, we're getting less and less snow in our mountains.
Utah Governor Spencer Cox has declared a state of emergency and called on people in Utah to reduce their water use and pray for rain.
We need some divine intervention.
So when the governor says, pray for rain, what do you say to that?
I say, the Lord helps those who help themselves. And the question is, are state leaders willing to accept that this is not a short-term drought, but that this is long-term climate change?
Utah is the second driest state in the country, but has some of the highest public water consumption per capita. Back on the farm, Gibson says a continued water crisis means an uncertain future.
Your family's been doing this for 152 years. That's many generations. Do you worry that this is the last generation of farming in your family?
You know, I can't sleep at night, and most nights, because that's exactly the concern.
We're told this marina would normally be floating on about 10 feet of water, but like much of the state, it has dried up. Utah feeds the Colorado River, and less water in the state means trouble downstream, impacting nearly 40 million people in 7 states. For CBS This Morning, Jonathan Bigliotti, Antelope Island, in Utah's Great Salt Lake.
I don't know how many more alarm bells you need, you know?
No, I feel for him saying, I can't sleep at night. Next time we complain about heavy rain, think about the people that would really kill to have a big drench.
And next time you open your fridge and you see fruit and you see vegetables, think about the farmers who are bringing that to us.
Yeah, I can't imagine being a farmer and imagining like 150 years of family farming maybe coming to an end here.
100% of California is now in a drought, and if you could believe it, it could get even worse. Farmers in the state looking for a lifeline. Thousands of their acres of land dried up. NBC News correspondent Steve Patterson is in Orville, California. Steve, you're on top of the second largest reservoir in the state overlooking Lake Orville. Show us what's going on there. Explain this one for us. It sounds pretty horrible.
It is horrible. It's horrible for millions of residents who rely on fresh water, and they do it based upon the reservoir system here in California. There are thousands of reservoirs across the state, and they supply not only towns, municipalities, cities, but also farmers who need this fresh water to irrigate crops and to do their work. We can actually show you right now what's happening at this reservoir. This is the second largest, as you mentioned, in this state. It supplies fresh water to millions. You can take a look and see that almost the sort of bathtub ring effect in the middle of the lake. The water level should be much higher. You should see it on the sides there. The water would actually be in that space, but it's not, obviously, because most of the water is gone here. It should be about 80% full. Right now it's at about 37%. That is dire for a number of reasons. If it goes any lower, it could risk a shutoff to the hydroelectric plant that this lake fuels, which means more stress on California's power grid, which is dangerous when we may be heading into a potentially dangerous fire season, but also just for the generality of it's hot and it's dry. And secondly, obviously, people need this water, especially, as I mentioned, farmers. Farmers are in a really bad way because they have to leave a lot of their crops fallow or unseeded. I spoke to a farmer in the Central Valley who said he has about a 2,000 acre farm. He's left 600 acres of that farm left unseeded. That is a huge cost to him, somewhere in the 7-figure range, and it means that he's had to already lay off about 70 workers. That could increase if this drought gets worse and the year goes on and it gets hotter and drier as it's expected to. Here's what he said about the fear of that. Listen to what he said.
I'm pretty scared this year, actually, yes, because we've never been in this kind of uncertainty before. I probably can't do this again next year. I can't do it again. It's too tough.
A lot of fear, a lot of uncertainty. He's lucky in the fact that he diversified early. So he has a number of different crops that he can use, some that don't need as much water as others. So he has the ability to do that. And also, he's getting some of his water shipped in from other farms across the state that have more water. But some farms obviously have one crop and aren't able to do that. And even with him doing that, there's still just not enough water to go around. It is a real crisis that starts at the farm and will probably end up at the table. Allison?
Yeah, let's talk about that a little bit, Steve, because we know how important California is as a producer for this country. The Central Valley grows more than 1/3 of the vegetables in the entire U.S., plus 2/3 of the fruits and nuts. I mean, what kind of supermarket shortages or shortages could we be looking at because of that? Should shoppers start getting concerned?
Yeah, fruits, berries, nuts, essentially all the artichokes you eat, all the almonds you eat come from California. So it's a huge deal. It's too early to tell whether or not this is going to cause, complete shortages in the grocery store a few months from now, simply because it's not obviously the harvest for a lot of these crops. But the farmer I spoke to, Joe Del Bosque, was in that clip that you just saw, basically said that there is no way to avoid this if this goes on like it does. And this could last not only the next few months, but years and years and years. There's no way you won't feel the pain at the grocery store as those items become more limited, because again, they all come from the same place. That's what people need to realize. So if they don't get the water, we don't get the crops, we don't get the groceries when we head to the grocery store. Allison?
Steve, last month Governor Newsom announced $5 billion plus to deal with water infrastructure and droughts. Where's that money going, and will it help these particular farmers?
So a lot of the money is going into what's called groundwater management. In other words, the way municipalities handle how they allocate the resource of water, which is so key, it's so important. That will help. It also it does provide some financial assistance for farmers. What it doesn't have, according to the farmer I spoke to, again, Joe, he said there isn't particular infrastructure for water storage. In other words, they aren't building more of these basins, more of these reservoirs that can hold water, so something like this doesn't happen again. That's the number one thing I've heard from farmers, especially in the Central Valley, where the access is much more limited. They want more actual structures built to hold water so they don't have to borrow from other parts of the state, so they can avoid this limited, sort of resource that's now going on and will continue to go on as we move into what's going to be probably a pretty difficult wildfire season as well. Allison?
Yes, Steve. It's horrible to think that it's just early June and they're dealing with all that already. Steve Patterson, thank you so much.
Hey, NBC News viewers, thanks for checking out.
Get moving with the Planet Fitness Black Card for zero enrollment, $22.99 a month, and get all the perks like massage.
This morning, our series Eye on Earth looks at the punishing drought gripping much of the western U.S. Scientists are calling it a mega drought brought on by climate change. Now look at this map. The latest U.S. Drought Monitor map shows large areas of the Southwest are exceptionally dry. That's never good. The worst category is taking a dramatic toll on the Colorado River system that provides water to 40 million people in 7 different states. CBS News senior environmental correspondent, that's Ben Tracy, traveled to the iconic Hoover Dam and shows us how the federal government may be forced to make a drastic and historic decision.
It's amazing to see it up close.
For more than 8 decades, the Hoover Dam has relied on water from Nevada's Lake Mead to cover up its backside. But now at age 85, it finds itself uncomfortably exposed. Much of the water the dam is supposed to be holding back is gone.
This is like a different world.
Pat Mulroy is the former head of the Southern Nevada Water Authority. She says Lake Mead, the nation's largest reservoir, is on track to soon hit its lowest level ever recorded. This part of the Colorado River system is a crucial water supply for Las Vegas, Phoenix, and Southern California. It makes the vast agricultural land of the desert Southwest possible.
This landscape screams problems to me. I mean, just look at the bathtub rings. To me, that is an enormous wake-up call.
Lake Mead is at just 37% of its capacity. It hasn't been full since back in 2000 when the water came right up to the top of Hoover Dam. This is what it looks like now.
Since 2000, Lake Mead has dropped 130 feet. That's hard to imagine, but picture a 13-story building on top of my head, and way up there, that's where the water used to be. So you and I talked here back in 2014, and at that time I asked you, how critical a point are we at?
It's a pretty critical point.
If you look at 30 feet lower now, what point are we at?
We're at a tipping point. It's an existential issue for Arizona, for California, for Nevada. It is just that simple.
For the first time ever, the federal government is expected to declare a water shortage on the lower Colorado River later this summer. That will force automatic cuts to the water supply for Nevada and Arizona starting in 2022. Homeowners have higher priority and at first won't feel the pain as badly as farmers.
If we don't have irrigation water, we can't farm.
Man, There is a second-generation family farmer in Arizona's Pinal County. The water to grow his corn and alfalfa fields comes from Lake Mead.
So next year, we're going to get about 25% less water. It means we're going to have to fallow or not plant 25% of our land.
In 2023, Thielander and other farmers in this part of Arizona are expected to lose nearly all of their water from Lake Mead. So they're rushing to dig wells to pump groundwater to try to save their farms.
The future here, honestly, I hate to say it, but it's pretty cloudy.
This is an engineering marvel for sure.
Back at Hoover Dam, facility manager Mark Cook has his own concerns. Lake Mead has dropped so much that it's cut the dam's hydropower output by nearly 25%.
So these are generating the electricity, these things? Yep, exactly.
He wanted to show us the new turbine blades they just installed.
So right below us right here is that brand new turbine.
Designed to keep the power flowing efficiently at rapidly dropping lake levels. At some point, the dam could stop producing electricity altogether.
Our previous number was at elevation 1050, and now we've lowered that number to 950. So we bought ourselves 100 feet. All those islands were underwater?
Completely submerged.
Pat Mulroy says a rapidly retreating reservoir may be the new normal, and the millions of people who rely on this water supply will have to quickly learn to live with less of it.
We don't change unless we absolutely have to. But when you look out at this lake, I think that moment of it's absolutely necessary has arrived.
For CBS This Morning, Ben Tracy, Lake Mead, Nevada.
Wow, that is an alarming outlook from Pat Mulroy there. A tipping point, she said.
Yeah, I think the days are upon us to
promise. And for the last 8 years, I've had to deal with hoaxers who claim that the sea...
The crippling drought across multiple states, the alarming images tonight of Lake Mead and the Hoover Dam. It's part of the Colorado River system, the water supply for 40 million Americans. Our chief national correspondent, Matt Gutman, tonight at the Hoover Dam.
Tonight, the images of this mega drought are writ across the Southwest's landscape. Bathtub rings around reservoirs show where the water once was. Boat marinas and fields bone dry. Experts say Lake Mead, part of the Colorado River system that provides water to some 40 million people in 7 states, is at just 37% capacity. Officials say it'll dip into its lowest level ever recorded tomorrow. Over the past 2 decades or so, the water level here at Lake Mead has decreased by about 130 feet. That's like a 13-story building, revealing islands that used to be completely submerged. And the water from this lake makes agriculture possible in the desert Southwest, where farmers are struggling.
It's an economic disaster. We don't plant crops, we don't have jobs, and as we saw during the pandemic, this industry is essential for everyone.
Lake Mead's Hoover Dam provides hydroelectric power to the region, but the dwindling water supply forcing the dam's output to be cut by nearly 25%. And at some point, officials warn it could be forced to stop producing altogether. Nearly 300,000 miles of the Southwest are in exceptional drought, an area bigger than the state of Texas. Last year was the worst fire season, and this year even drier. And experts say it's being driven by climate change.
Really important to stay on this. And Matt, the federal government could soon be forced to take some unprecedented steps here.
They're major steps, David. For the first time this summer, the federal government is set to announce a water shortage along the lower Colorado River. That triggers automatic cuts to water in Nevada and in Arizona starting as early as next year. David, it's going to affect a lot of people. Matt Gutman, thank you.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos.
Damn.
Heavily, there's a big area of very intense flame right now that's next to a very explosive area. Would you say? I mean, it's a very big problem out there going, and they're fighting like hell. We've never seen anything like this in California. We've never seen anything like this here. It's like total devastation. But again, I want to thank everybody, and Brock is going to give you a little presentation as to where we're going, what we're doing, and how we're doing it. But again, the men and women that are fighting this fire are incredible. You know that more than 70 people are lost, are gone. And we're looking for hundreds of people right now. There are literally hundreds that they're looking for. That hopefully that's going to be a good conclusion instead of a bad conclusion. Maybe they left and maybe they're with their loved ones somewhere else, so we just don't know about it. But they're looking for hundreds of people. And we'll know the answer to that over the next 48 hours, I think, for the most part. Brock, perhaps you could give a little bit of a presentation as to how we're going to stop the rest of this monster.
Yes, sir. So, Mr. President, as we've discussed, this is probably the worst disaster that I've seen in my career. And it's going to take a partnership at all levels of government, not only helping the governor achieve his response and recovery goals, but also it's the time for neighbor helping neighbor. That's what's most important. FEMA is on the ground. I've been here since Tuesday, making sure that we have full situational awareness on how to help the state achieve what needs to be done when it comes to the firefighting, but also the taking care of people part, the mass care issue. So we have set up disaster recovery centers where we're also asking people to call 1-800-621-FEMA or go to disasterassistance.gov to register. To this point, as of this morning, I think we've had over 12,000 people already registered into our assistance system, and we've handed out close to $3 million directly to those who have qualified for assistance. Obviously, the firefight is the main priority in taking care of people and making sure that we can get people transitioning out of shelters into longer-term homes. And then we're also working with Mark Villaducci in the state of California, who's done a tremendous job making sure that we help them understand how we're going to do debris removal and get the infrastructure back up. so that we can start to help communities like Concal, Paradise, Stratford, and New Normal. So with that, I think it's time for us to turn it over to the incident commanders who's fighting the fire.
Mr. President, I turn you to this. So this is a progression map of the fire. The blue is the very first day when we experienced the most significant damage. Obviously, it went almost 55,000 acres within the first 12 hours, and almost 8,000 structures were burned that time. So, the Concal, Paradise, which I believe in the Valley were all part of that. There are still significant challenges in the Feather River drainage, the weather, the receiving there, the winds, and the red flag warning is still coming this weekend along the fire. Absolutely, this whole area, especially in the river drainage, and there's still communities of Berry Creek and other communities outside the burn area that we are concerned with. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Grant. Thank you.
President, do you see the role of climate change in the environment in California?
Say it.
The role of climate change in the environment in California?
Well, I think you have a lot of factors. We have the management factors that I know Jerry's really been up on and very well. And Gavin is we're going to be looking at it together. And right now that seems to be a very big problem. And we're going to get that problem solved. In the Farm Bill, we're putting quite a bit of money, about $500 million in the Farm Bill for management and maintenance of the forests beyond this area, but really management, $500 million. That'll be in the Farm Bill. We just put it in. The Farm Bill is moving along pretty rapidly for our great farmers. But we have a new category, and that's management and maintenance. No. I have a strong opinion. I want great climate. We're going to have that, and we're going to have forests that are very safe. Because we can't go through this every year. We go through this, so we're going to have safe forests, and that's happening as we speak. We're going to work together with the federal government. No, state, local, and federal government. Federal government's going to work with the state and local, and we're going to help them with funding. And it's going to take a lot of funding, I will tell you that.
They have done things differently before this one?
A lot of things have been learned. And they've been working very hard, and I think you're going to see something very spectacular over the next number of years.
I think if we can really look at the facts from a very open point of view, there are a lot of elements to be considered, and the President came, he saw, and I'm looking forward over the next months and even beyond to really understand this threat of fire, the whole matter of drought and all the rest of it. And it's not one thing, it's a lot of things. And I think if we can just open our minds and look at things, we'll get more stuff done.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
U.S. West Coast still under that haze of thick, choking smoke. And as firefighters struggle to contain those raging fires, the other battle, the one over blaming this on climate change or to deny climate change, was likewise heating up fast. Joe Biden today slammed Donald Trump as a denier who's making things worse now and threatening an even deadlier future.
Give a climate arsonist 4 more years in the White House, why would anyone be surprised if we have more America ablaze?
Today in California, to assess things for himself, Trump again blamed poor forest management, not climate change, as the key contributor to the fires.
When trees fall down after a short period of time, about 18 months, they become very dry. They become really like a matchstick. And they get up, there's no more water pouring through, and they become very, they just explode.
Later, at a briefing on the fires, we can agree to disagree, and California's governor seemed to practically beg Trump to see things differently.
Climate change is real, and that is exacerbating this.
We've had temperatures explode this summer.
And to a president also accused of ignoring science on the COVID pandemic, some today framed their climate concerns as a dire warning.
If we ignore that science and sort of put our head in the sand and think it's all about vegetation management, we're not going to succeed together protecting Californians.
It'll start getting cooler. You just watch.
I wish science agreed with you.
Well, I don't think science knows, actually.
On that, say experts, Trump is just plain wrong. Tonight, at a panel discussion in Arizona with Trump, the crowd on hand chanted loudly, 4 more years. Paul Hunter, CBC News, Washington.
What does it mean to
the forest fires are starting. They're starting again in California. They said, you gotta clean your floors, you gotta clean your forests. They have many, many years of leaves and broken trees. And they're like so flammable. You touch them and it goes out. I've been telling them this now for 3 years. But they don't want to listen. The environment.
You look at
whole different story. I was with the president of Finland, and he said we have much different. We're a forest nation. He called it a forest nation, and they spend a lot of time on raking and cleaning and doing things.
Raking. You got to rake the entire forest.
Our team coverage continues now with ABC 15 analyst Garrett Archer going in depth with a look at wildfire
101 degrees.
Massive fires
Arizona.
in past seasons.
It's good weather.
The 2021 fire season is already shaping up to be a big one. With 177,000
101 degrees.
Burned, the season is larger than 6 of the past 20 years. The average yearly number of fires in a given year, around 2,200. In 2021, so far only 132. Take a look at this map with the 10 largest wildfires in Arizona since 2000. The Telegraph Fire, burning just west of Globe, is already at number 10 with more than 80,000 acres burned. The largest wildfire in Arizona's history was the Wallow Fire in 2011, which covered 538,000 acres. 2011 also saw the 4th largest fire in the state's history, Horseshoe 2 at 222,000 acres. 2011 is the only season in which over 1 million acres were burned. In 20 years, over 1 million acres have been impacted by wildfires in the state's northeasternmost counties. Central Arizona, meanwhile, has had 762,000 acres affected. All in all, almost 7 million acres in Arizona have been impacted by wildfires in the past 20 years. This is about 9% of Arizona's total landmass.
Been times in the past when we've seen receding glaciers and receding ice sheets and comments about, my goodness, things seem to be going in the opposite direction, glaciers, you know. And what's the difference now?
Right, so for measuring, say, what Greenland is doing, some of that work is done by weighing the ice sheet using the GRACE gravity satellites, which is truly wonderful. It's like watching cars on a roller coaster, and the one going down gets away from the one that's going up, and then the one going down catches up, and you watch.
As I understand, it's fascinating that we've satellites sort of pursuing each other, and gravitational attraction slows one down, and by relative to the other, by measuring the rate of that different speed, you can tell how much mass is underneath you. Absolutely. And as that mass declines, there's less slowing down.
Perfect. I should retire and let you teach this.
I just think it's beautiful. Really interesting.
So you weigh them using GRACE, but then you measure changes in surface elevation. Is it going down or up using a radar or a laser from a plane or a satellite? And all of those have been done. And then you figure out how much snow is being added and how much meltwater is leaving and how much ice is leaving. And then you compare all of these to see if they give the same answer. And all of them indicate shrinkage of Greenland. You're certainly correct that the ice has grown and shrunk in the past, and I had the honor of serving for the U.S. government on the Climate Change Science Program on a report on the history of the Arctic, and what we found was very clear for Greenland. When nature made it warmer, Greenland got smaller, and when nature made it colder, Greenland got bigger. And we are now making it warmer, and Greenland is getting smaller.
How do we know it's we, not nature? We've got the increase in CO2. But the skeptic would argue, well, wait a second, I can go back to 1927 and find articles about glaciers retreating. What's the difference? I mean, You know, you could look at a football team and say, well, they were losing back then and they're losing now, so what's the difference?
Right, so the first one is the physics. We just cannot get away from the warming effect of CO2. It's been known for over a century. It was really clarified by the Air Force, who were actually interested in what wavelength should I use for the sensor on my heat-seeking missile. But CO2 interacts with radiation, and there's enough CO2 to make a difference. And we just can't get away from that physics. The second one is looking at, is there any other possible thing to explain this? And it really took, I'm sorry, sir, it took a few $1 billion of your money and about 30 years to say that there's nothing else that we can find in nature to do this. And this is because satellites are expensive. But someone says it's the sun. Well, then you need a satellite to watch the sun to see if the sun is getting brighter, but it isn't. And if someone says, well, it's volcanoes, then we need a history of volcanoes, and we need to know what they're doing. And if someone says it's cosmic rays, we need cosmic ray monitors. And it's taken sort of 30 years to get to the point of saying, no, we've looked really hard, we can't find anything else. Then there's a third piece, which is the fingerprinting, which is what Dr. Santer was discussing. If you were to say, okay, yeah, I know we spend a lot of money on satellites, and the satellites say the sun is not getting brighter, but maybe the satellites are wrong and the sun's getting brighter and we can't see it. That makes a prediction. It gets warmer down here and it gets warmer way up at the top of the stratosphere. CO2 says warmer, colder. What's going on? Warmer, colder. So the fingerprinting in time and in space says that we got it right on the other two pieces. It's mostly us now.
I want to be clear, it's not my money. It's your money.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Absolutely.
It's the taxpayers' money. I never forget it, but I think at the same time, the consequences adversely, if we don't address our energy dependence, and if we don't address the apparently, in my judgment, real impacts of this will vastly exceed $1 billion, and if we can make some measured changes to reduce that impact, the savings will exceed the expenditures by a darn sight. Dr. Santer, you might want to comment. Dr. Michaels, then I'll recognize my colleagues.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment briefly on what Dr. Ali said about the fingerprinting. We've known that increases in CO2 have this characteristic fingerprint of warming the lower atmosphere, the troposphere, and cooling the upper atmosphere since about the late 1950s, early 1960s, when people performed the first numerical model experiments and doubled CO2. And they saw this characteristic pattern of cooling of the stratosphere, warming of the troposphere. Very robust. We see that in virtually every model experiment that's been performed. And as mentioned, we also see it in observations too. We see it in satellite data, we see it in weather balloon data. Now, people often say these computer models are not falsifiable. They make predictions that we can't test. That's not true. Back in the 1960s, when Suki Manabe and his colleagues at the Geophysical Fluid Dynamics Lab in Princeton made these calculations and doubled atmospheric CO2 and saw this fingerprint, we didn't really have the observational data to see whether the stratosphere was actually cooling, whether the troposphere was warming. They have. The stratosphere has cooled, the troposphere has warmed. That fingerprint is robust, and it's just not consistent with other natural causes.
Dr. Michaels, did you care to comment on any of this?
I have several comments I'd like to make. We'll probably take off the rest of the day, so I'll just limit. That won't happen. No, it certainly won't. I will limit it to the notion.
Access Vision. Your voice, your community.